This brief history of Zionism is presented by Zachary Lockman, Professor of Middle Eastern Studies and History and Chair of the Department of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies at New York University. Professor Lockman began with a description of the origins of Zionism.
I think we can see Zionism as one of a whole series of different and often conflicting responses by Jews in Europe, and especially in Central and Eastern Europe, where most of the Jews lived at the time, to the situation they found themselves in the late 19th century. The great majority of Europe's Jews and of the world's Jews at that time lived in Tsarist Russia, within the Tsarist Empire, where they were discriminated against, often persecuted as Jews, and were also extremely poor in their great majority. And in the process of figuring out how to respond to this situation, Zionism was one tendency that emerged. There were lots of others, and others that were much more popular at the time and for decades afterwards. For example, from the 1880s onward, after the wave of anti-Jewish pogroms that erupted in Tsarist Russia, millions of Jews picked up and left. They voted with their feet, in a sense, and went to other places where they hoped they could live lives that were not subject to persecution and discrimination, and find economic opportunity, escape from the terrible poverty in which most Jews in the Tsarist Empire were enmeshed. And this is when we get the mass migration of Jews from Eastern Europe to the United States, and to a lesser extent to Western Europe, South Africa, Argentina, and so forth. And in this sense, Jews were part of a vast wave of millions of immigrants out of Eastern and Central and Southern Europe, most of them non-Jews, escaping poverty, seeking opportunity, in some cases seeking religious or national freedom. So this was one very powerful response. A great many Jews in Eastern Europe stuck to the old ways. They continued to live deeply religious lives. They felt that whatever they endured was God's will, and as long as they lived in accordance with the laws of the Torah, God's commandments as they saw it, this is how it had to be, even as they tried to get through day to day. In Russia and elsewhere, many Jews abandoned the old ways. They felt that the old laws, the old religious commandments, were no longer relevant to their new lives. This period witnessed the spread of education, urbanization, very rapid demographic growth, and many Jews escaped the tutelage, the domination of their rabbis and their close-knit, tightly controlled communities, and became much more secular, and sought advancement either through education, although that didn't get you very far in Tsarist Russia. There were limits to how far Jews could advance, or they turned to movements for social change. Jews were just one of many oppressed nationalities in Tsarist Russia, and of course the great bulk of the population were oppressed in class terms. The great bulk of the peasant population were ruthlessly exploited by their landlords and the urban working class, which was growing very rapidly. So many Jews joined the clandestine movements, parties, organizations that fought to end Tsarist oppression, to overthrow the Tsarist regime and create a democratic and socialist Russia in which Jews, with all the other oppressed nationalities, would have equal rights. And this is why Jews played a very disproportionate role, a very disproportionately large role in all the movements of opposition to the Tsarist regime, including the left-wing movements, the socialist movements, including ultimately the Bolshevik movement. If we look at the Russian Revolution, the October Revolution, which brought the Bolsheviks to power in 1917, not Lenin, of course, who was the preeminent leader of the Bolsheviks, but most of his top lieutenants were Jewish. And this is because of the double oppression to which Jews were subjected in Tsarist Russia as Jews and as poor people, as poor working people. So we have a whole set of responses, ranging from the hope for assimilation through education, the eradication of anti-Semitism, to revolutionary change, to emigration, to sticking to the old ways. And of course, among all those tendencies, you have the emergence of Jewish nationalism, which comes to be called in the 1890s Zionism. And this too is not very surprising. If you look what goes on in Europe, across Europe, in the 19th century, this is the age of nationalism. This is the age in which one people after another develop new forms of national identity and come to feel that it's no longer acceptable for them to be ruled by people, they come by empires, by states they come to see as as alien and oppressive. And so in Italy, in Germany, in Greece, in Serbia, in Poland, across, and these, of course, are not nation states at the time. They're empires. They're ruled by others. You have nationalist movements which seek to establish independent nation states for this new category of people, which is usually defined by its language. Right? Before the 19th century, the idea that everybody who spoke German should be in one Germany would not have occurred to anyone. Or the idea that everybody who spoke Italian in all its dialects should be within one nation state called Italy, and that nation state should be independent of the rule of Austria or the other outside powers that dominate it, would not have occurred to anyone. People would not even have defined themselves as Italian first and foremost. But in the course of the 19th century, this idea of nationalism spreads very rapidly and challenges or disrupts and undermines all the old multi-ethnic polyglot empires, the Tsarist Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the German Empire, certainly challenges them and helps lead to their collapse at the end of the First World War. So it's no surprising in this situation that some Jews began to feel that what they too needed to escape from anti-Semitism, to achieve equality within Europe, was a nation state of their own. Now, of course, the difference between the Jews and the Poles, or the Jews and the Czechs, or the Jews and the Italians, was that Jews were everywhere a minority in Europe. Even in places where they constituted a significant minority, they were still a minority. So there was no possibility of carving out a Jewish state in the middle of Ukraine or Poland or Russia. It simply wasn't going to happen. Jews were a relatively small minority, which means that any form of Jewish nationalism had to be a movement of emigration. Jews would have to be convinced to go to some other place, and in that other place create a Jewish state, a Jewish majority society and a Jewish state, and thereby achieve their proper national self as nationalists conceived of it, and ultimately thereby achieve equality with a Europe that had rejected them. This was a minority movement. There were, before the 1880s, that you can find a few voices who begin to talk about this. Most religious Jews had no interest in this because, from their point of view, one had to wait. A proper Jew had to wait for the coming of the Messiah to escape exile, to escape persecution, and only when the Messiah came and the end of days arrived could Jews be restored to their ancestral homeland. The house of David would be restored, and we'd have what Christians would later call the kingdom of heaven on earth. So religious Jews were not interested in political projects of this kind. Certainly socialist Jews were also not interested.
You've been listening to the first 8 minutes of A Brief History of Zionism, presented by Professor of Middle Eastern Studies and History, Zachary Lockman. This presentation is available in full at the Vimeo Home for Videos at vimeo.com. Search on the keywords Lockman and PDX Justice. You can also link to this program via the PDX Justice Media Productions website at pdxjustice.org. This program was produced by PDX Justice Media Productions of Portland, Oregon. To find out more about our work and to access our growing library of free on-demand streaming video and audio programs, please visit our website at pdxjustice.org. And write to us with your questions and comments at pdxjustice@riseup.net. We'd love to hear from you. Many of our programs are available on DVD or Blu-ray video discs. Please write to us for ordering information. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for supporting listener-sponsored radio, public access cable television, net neutrality, independent bookstores, and all forms of grassroots, democratic community media.